Before we get into this too deep, I want to show you a selection of different kinds of scrapers. When we think of scrapers, maybe the first thing that most woodworkers would think about is what we call a card scraper. It's a piece of soft steel, fairly flat, but the way it works is by actually cutting. It is not scraping. We take the thing after it's been flattened and we put it into what's called a burnisher. And this burnisher is simply a piece of carbide rod, which I can adjust the angle for, and I push the scraper down against it. And what it does is raise a burr on that. And the cutting is with that burr. It is a cutting tool. Well, we have the similar kind of thing. I'm going to show you how to sharpen our scrapers in a minute. But let's go through kind of a collection. I think when we talk about scrapers, we think of tools sort of like this, the standard bowl scraper. I like them rounded past vertical here so that this corner doesn't catch. Here's an example of one that hasn't yet been properly rounded off. This corner needs to be pulled back a little bit more just so it doesn't dig into your project. They come in all sizes and shapes, and we still think about them like this. I do something else on mine. I always pull the back corner back a little bit, the purpose of which is so that when this goes into a vessel, it doesn't drag so much. Different size, different shapes, even flat across like this, purpose of which is to work on the flat bottom of, let's say, a platter. But these tools that we use in hollowing, regardless of the brand, there's one from John Jordan. This is a McNaughton. This is an Ellsworth style. These are also scrapers. They go into the vessel and they literally scrape, so we have to keep them also equally sharpened. I showed you beating tools in other videos. This is a brand from Sorby, which literally is a scraper. So on. I've got a skew chisel laid out here. And I talked to you in one of the past videos, the one right before this one specifically, about the fact you'd see this again. And you're going to see it again because I'm now going to use it as a negative rake scraper. And I'll show you that. Negative rake scrapers have come a long way from when I first started just cutting the back edge a little bit. And now this is a tool that is made by D-Way and a very specific negative rake. This is about 20-degree angle here and about a 70-degree angle on the back of this thing creates an opportunity when sharpened to push up a huge, huge burr. So I figured I'd make myself one, and I took one of my older tools, did precisely the same thing, and you can get a tremendously large burr on this tool. So let me show you, first of all, how to sharpen these things. Now we're going to talk to you about how they cut and why we don't get catches quite the same way with these. So let me show you about sharpening. I'm just going to take one at random here. This one is one from the school. It's used in our bowls class a lot. And I run my finger across the top of this. I feel no burr. And so for me to raise a burr to improve the cutting, I'm first going to make sure this is absolutely dead flat. And I've got a piece of sandpaper on a flat board here. And that's just a few strokes to be sure there is nothing left. And now I'm going to go over to what's called a scraper burnisher and show you how we actually sharpen these. Just like we sharpen the cabinet scrapers by using a carbide rod that's mounted in that piece of wood, Veritas also makes a device to allow us to do that for our bowl scrapers. I have one clamped here to the end of the lathe bed. It has a pivot point, which is simply to help me get good mechanical control, and it has a carbide pin. And all I do is lay the tool on here against the pivot point and push it up against that carbide pin. And about 2 strokes, and while this is not feel-o-vision, I can tell you that there is a significant burr on this piece of high-speed steel that's been pushed up just that rapidly. So when this burr goes away, cutting on soft woods gets more difficult. And so we'd go back, reflatten, go back to the burnisher again, and push that back up. And that's all there is. I could also use the shaft of a screwdriver, which is a hardened piece of steel, or a carbide rod. I've seen those before, all of which would just require me to push it by hand around this shape, and that also will work. So this is probably not the best place to put it, but for our vision today, this seems to be something that we can do. But scrapers cut in different ways than our gouges do. The burr allows us to cut in a much more traditional way on our softer woods. And let me go to the blackboard and talk to you a little bit about how scrapers cut. Not scrape, cut. When we talked in the early video, on the number 1 video of this series, we talked about how a wedge is used to do the plastic deformation of a spinning piece. Remember, we talked about the first tool pressure was downward against the tool rest. The second one was in getting this bevel touching the wood and touching very nicely. And the third one was the motor itself, which is moving the wood into the cutting edge. That was the third force. Well, now here we same the same 3 on our scraper. We still have number 1 down to the tool rest. If it comes off the tool rest, we're out of control. Number 2, we're pressing toward the wood, and the wood is coming around, but what's happening here that's different is instead of coming in and breaking the molecular and chemical bonds between the layers of the wood and literally prying it free, which is what they do. Here we're compressing those fibers, pushing them into each other, and the plastic deformation now causes them to chip off. If you look at the chips that come off of your scraper, you'll find that they look entirely different than the chips that come off of a gouge. Where we are slicing into it, here we're compressing the wood and causing it to fracture and break off. You'll find the ribbons looking entirely differently. Now, we talked about scrapers having a shape like this or like that, whatever. When we talk about negative rake, we simply mean that what we've done is to cut an angle in the top of it. It does 2 things. It allows us to keep the tool from getting beyond 90 degrees and becoming a cutting tool that's out of control, and allowing us to be able to enter the tool into the project at a much more convenient, safe angle. But it also changes the way the tool works. Instead of slicing into it, it starts compressing these fibers here and pulling them apart. Now, the new version of negative rake scrapers, one of which I think I've shown you already, has a back angle like this, and it has a very severe front angle like that. Clean up my picture just a little bit. 60 degrees, 20 degrees, the 2 different angles. I've set my platforms at home to match up the angles. But what happens is you sharpen this side first, you sharpen the back of the tool second. And the reason is when you sharpen this, that pushes up the burr. So it becomes a very aggressive burr. So when do we use the burr on soft woods? The traditional thought is that for harder woods, negative rake scrapers are used, generally not with the burr because it breaks off after a cut or 2. Also, gnarly woods that have miscellaneous random moving grains, all respond very well to scrapers. So let's go to the lathe and let me show you some of these tools in action and talk a little bit more about how they work and why we can get a catch with a scraper. Come over to the lathe. I'm going to show you several scrapers in use, first on spindles, then a bowl, and then finally a platter. But I want to show you first how they're used properly, and then I'm going to see if I can demonstrate to you ways they should not be used. First of all, this is a piece that you saw in one of my earlier videos where I was doing beads and coves. But also, I just put a really nice clean cove into this one simply by using the scraper itself. This one's been freshly sharpened. I have broken the heel on the back of it, which I do on all my tools in case I put them into a very narrow opening. The heel will never grab or drag. So simply, I'll start a fresh one here. The handle is higher than the cutting edge. If I drop the handle too far, this approaches an angle greater than 90 degrees and becomes a cutting tool, and a very aggressive one. So I always want to keep the angle of the edge to the surface of the wood less than 90 degrees. And that means generally raising the handle of the tool higher than center line. So I have done that. And on this fairly soft wood, that was quite easy to do. I'm cutting across the grain. The handle is higher than the blade. Now, if I had dropped the tool rest and approached this like I would a typical gouge, I'm risking this digging in, pulling the tool like this, taking a huge chip out of the wood, and perhaps either breaking the shaft of the tool or hitting me in the face with the handle. So always keep the handle on scrapers, unless they are negative rake scrapers, higher than horizontal. When we do big bowls, we sometimes hold the tool on top of our arm in order to be sure the handle is higher than the cutting edge. So that was a very clean, obviously symmetrical cove, because it was the shape of that tool. I have many scrapers at home, and I tell you why I have them is because I need different shapes for different purposes. Let me lay this aside, and I'm going to take another scraper. This one is negative rake. It's negative rake because I just went to the grinder and ground a back angle on the top of this that's very, very subtle. Will it do good across this grain? Probably not so well. Let's give it a try. Ooh, tool rest has to be a little higher because I need to be sure I'm down angle. Even with negative rake, I tend to do that. Now it's cutting clean. I can actually go in with this absolutely horizontal because the cutting angle is literally this angle here, less than 90 degrees. If I present the tool horizontally, I get a very nice clean-up cut because that edge is less than 90 degrees. So the whole trick with negative rake scrapers is you literally can present them horizontally, but they are not as aggressive as the standard scraper. I was putting more pressure forward to cause the wood to collapse those fibers, compress them, and throw them off. It took more pressure because it was negative rake. Here's another negative rake scraper. It looks a lot like my skew chisel. It's double-edged. And I can tell you that there's a burr on this face here because this was the last side sharpened. Pushes the burr up. Can I treat this? Very nicely. The edge is smaller. And the surface I get off of it is very, very attractive. Very, very nice. So this works better as a negative rake scraper than this one does because the edge is more acute. The burr is tighter. Here's a commercial variation on that. This is a negative rake scraper that has recently been introduced to the market. This one is from D-Way Tools. It has an angle here and it has a very sharp angle on the top. The back was sharpened last. Now, being curved like this, it's great for inside of bowls, but I'm just doing it on the spindle to prove my point that these two are cutting very similarly. Well, I mentioned bowls. Let's put a bowl on. and see what bowl scrapers look like. I put a bowl blank on here. This is a demo bowl that we've used before. It's kind of interesting from the standpoint it's got a knot, it's got an inclusion, it's got a bark limb coming through here at an angle, so I have cross-grain situations. Interesting bowl to practice with. So here's a traditional bowl scraper. I have gone to the grinder and sharpened it, which pushed the burr up a little bit, and then I used the Burnisher to try to push it up a little bit more. And now I have a slight burr on this thing, and now, as I said, this is a traditional one, so if I went in square at 90 degrees, or with the handle dropped, I'm going to be in a mode where I could get a catch or a very large divot taken out of the bowl. So I always have to be less than 90 degrees angle to the surface. So to do that, what we always do in our classes is instruct the students to put it on top of their arm, put their finger along the side, because that's pointing where you want to go, and make this cut. Now the shape of this goes past center, so when I go in here, this corner is going to be away from the wood surface and not risking getting caught. So I always regrind them to take that corner back. That eliminates other possible problems. In our advanced bowl classes, when the surface outside is smoother, I'll have the student put the hand on the outside of the bowl for steadiness and then use the thumb to help pull the tool around. So let's make a quick cut. We'll start in the center and come all the way to the rim. I can do that because the curve of the tool allows me to start here and continue all the way around the side. I want you to see these curls. They are different than the ones that come off of a gouge because these are from a compression cut. So that's your standard scraper. I'm going to save these. We'll take a close-up of those and put them for you to see in a minute. So here is the scraper, which I went to the grinder and some arbitrary angle ground a back angle on the tip of it. It's a negative rake scraper. Let's give it a try. Again, handle high, smaller tool. There's the knot. Now when I was going across the bottom, running with the grain like this, I'm getting these curls again. But as I come up the side where I'm hitting a lot of end grain, it turns into more dust-like cuts. And this one doesn't have much of a burr on it anymore. Let's use one of the new commercial negative rake scrapers. Has a very severe angle, and so when this backside is sharpened last, it pushes up a very large burr automatically. Let me get the tool rest in a little closer if I can. I can. Now I'm going to put a handle on it. Oops, I run my fingers into the side of the bowl. It wasn't a tool problem, it was a gym problem. So, we're getting the same curls when we go across the bottom, and we're getting the dust as we come across the end grain fibers. And that burr on this has been reduced a tremendous amount. And if I was going to make another cut on this hardwood bowl, this is a piece of maple, I would need to put that burr back on there again because it is gone. I made my own version of it. I took an older thick scraper and did precisely the same thing to it. So here's the same thing as the D-Way tools, but the Jim Rogers make of being a little thicker tool. I need to check that I still can get to the center. I'm still getting the same curls, but they're a different size. These are a little smaller than the ones I got off of the commercial tool. But I continue to get curls up into the side before it turned into dust. So there's the original ones. This is off of mine. So negative rake scrapers. It's pretty doggone hard for me to get that in a position where it's going to make a catch. Could I have used my skew chisel in here as a negative rake scraper? No. Why? I have a sharp corner here that if I went in with this, that corner is going to catch and engage the wood, and I'm going to cut a slot across the bottom. Because the flat of this thing I probably could, because I can keep the corners of the tool away. And there is the curls again, not as big, smaller tool. So, in using scrapers to prevent that catch, never let that handle get to a place where it becomes a cutting tool. In other words, this edge has to engage the wood fibers at less than 90 degrees. The definition of a scraper is a tool that cuts at 90 degrees or less. A gouge, a skew chisel, parting tool, if you look at those angles, the angles always exceed 90 degrees to the surface of the wood. So we are shearing the fibers. Here we are compressing the fibers. The plastic motion of the wood is different. I'm going to change off one more time because I want to show you another kind of scraper, one that becomes very useful when we're doing platters. So I'm going to change this out and put a platter blank in here. I put a platter blank on, one that I've worked on before. It's a little out of round because it's sat on my desk for a few weeks. But I brought along a negative rake scraper. Sorry, it looks like my skew. And I brought along also a scraper that was designed specifically for platters. The angle across here is fairly flat. It could have actually been even flatter. One of the difficulties in platters is getting this area in the center of the platter smooth and regular. So let's try with a regular scraper. And I'm looking at, with the handle high, whether it's going to go through the center of the blank or not. It's just that low, just a smidge. So when the thing is running, I can see where the center is exactly. Wow. Same type of shavings. Scrapers give you a different cut. And because of the flatness of this, these are fairly wide. Worked fine. Can I do the same thing with my other scraper? Sure I can. But because it's a thinner tool, I've got to raise the tool rest a bit until I hit that center. But because it has sharp corners, I've got to be very cautious I don't run it into things. Now coming up to this bead, it doesn't work very good, but if I lead with a long point, it's really great at coming all the way right up here to this corner and into that corner. Again, the same shavings. They are smaller in width because of the different geometry of the tool, but it's the same type of curl. Actually, I did get a couple of fairly wide ones off of this one also. So here's the points I want to make about scrapers. If they are negative rake, the chance of getting a catch is much more reduced unless you drop the handle so far that you convert it into a cutting tool. You must always approach it at less than 90 degrees. If you're using a standard scraper of this type, we have to always make sure that that edge approaches the wood at less than 90 degrees, and that is done by elevating the handle so that the blade engages. Can we get a catch with a scraper? Absolutely. It's very difficult, but I wanted to talk about that less than 90 degrees, and I also wanted to talk about how this cuts differently. This is a compression cut. The plastic deformation is different, and if you look at this, the chips that come off the tool, you'll notice that. So have fun with your scrapers. Everybody needs to have a collection of those also. Everything is not a shearing cut with a gouge. How do we clean up a lot of things? This is the tool I go to a lot. Thanks for watching the series. I hope that we're giving you information that you can use, and it'll help you in your improving your turning skills and projects. Please subscribe. It really helps us to keep the readership up and gives us additional capabilities through our friends at YouTube. And if you have comments, interesting ideas you'd like us to explore further, please add them in the comments down here below. We always read those. They're very helpful. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later.
These are the curls that came off of this tool. As you see, they are pressed, curls, and they're very, very flat. It's this tool. So I did it with mine. And because the angles are a little bit different, I'm also getting the curls, but they just happen to be a little bit smaller. This tool vibrated less because it's more mass to it.